This DVMax practice training session will deal with invoicing. DVMax provides multiple means of creating an invoice for a client. For those facilities who are not currently utilizing paperless medical records, it's possible to make an invoice directly for a client or a patient. If we're making an invoice for a client, we might first search for that client, in this case typing in the first few letters of the last name of the client, which will then bring us directly to a client general information screen. As we've seen before, listed on the bottom left-hand side are the patients or pets that belong to this particular client record. If we know the animal for whom the invoice will be made, we can click first on that animal's name. Then we can select from the client menu, Create an Invoice. Notice to the right of that selection we can see that there are keyboard equivalents, as we've seen before. In the case of a Windows computer, typing in Control button I will gain access to an invoice, and on an Apple computer, the Apple button followed by I will gain access to the invoice. If we click on Create an Invoice, we're taken first to a screen upon which we will select the primary provider of services for this animal. That individual will be listed at the top of the invoice. That means we will select the clinician who will assume primary responsibility for the care of this animal during this visit, and therefore will be listed as the provider of these services. Clicking OK takes us directly to the invoice. This is a general invoice to be made for this client. To the left is the quantity column. In that column, we will identify the quantity of each of the line items to be provided for this patient. The next column will be the date, obviously identifying the date that that service or item was provided to this patient. The next column is the staff. We identified who the primary clinician was on the previous screen, but it's possible that someone other than the primary clinician may receive credit for having provided the service on the line that is being identified at this time. For instance, it's possible that Bass will be given credit for the examination, but a technician might be given credit for performing a urinalysis. That's strictly up to the discretion of the facility. The next column identifies the patient. Certainly, we clicked on Lucky on the previous screen, identifying that that was the patient to be named on this invoice. It's possible to invoice for more than one of the patients that belongs to this client. In other words, you can have a multiple patient invoice. The next column identifies the code. Into that field, we would enter the code or the name of the item that we wish to provide. The next will be the description. That will be automatically inserted by DVMax unless that particular bill item has been identified on the bill item screen as being one that will permit us to rename the item. We'll cover that later. The next item over is the price field. That identifies the unit price, in other words, the price for each individual item that was identified on that line in the code and description boxes. The extended column will take the price, which is the unit price of that item, multiply it by the quantity, and end up with a price which would be the extended price, meaning the quantity times the price equals the extension. The tax column will identify whether or not that particular line item is indeed taxed. Dispensed versus administered permits the user to provide a service to an animal that is not actually dispensed to them, but is in fact provided to them. For instance, it's possible to have two different prices for a drug, one if the item is dispensed to the client, and the other if it's administered while the patient is in the hospital. If we begin using the invoice, we can type in the code or the description of the item we wish to provide. In this case, typing in EXAM or exam, then typing in the tab button permits DVMax to list for us all of those items that begin with the string of letters EXAM. We can select the item that we wish, in this case examination office call, then click OK. DVMax knows the code and will in fact replace the letters that we typed into the code field with the code. It also typed in the actual name or description of this item directly into the description field. There's a price associated with this item, and then there's the extension, which again is the quantity times the price. Obviously, in this case, we are providing one examination times the price equals the extension. This item is not taxed. Notice DVMax automatically went to the next field down, which would be the quantity field. If we tab to the next field and type in the first few letters of the item we now wish to provide, for instance, perhaps urinalysis, and then hit the Tab button, DVMax will bring up a list of those items that begin with the string of letters URINA. If we see the item that we wish to provide, in this case a complete in-house urinalysis, and notice that the code is listed off to the right side on this screen. We did not need to know the code in order to enter this item. In fact, we could have typed in the code, but DVMax does not require that anyone memorize any of the codes. We simply typed in the first few letters of the name of the item we wanted to provide. If we then click OK, DVMax will insert the code in the appropriate location and also the description or name of this item in the appropriate location. Again, there is a price times the quantity equals the extension. Suppose we wanted to dispense 14 of a particular drug, in this case perhaps amoxicillin. We type in the first few letters of the name of amoxicillin. We select the one in which we're interested, in this case the amoxicillin caps 500 milligram, click OK. DVMax will now take the quantity times a unit price, and in this case has added a dispensing fee and will yield a total extended price of $18.78. Clearly, 14 times 27 cents does not equal the extension. That's because there's an additional fee, which in this case is hidden on this screen, and indeed this unit price will be hidden on the printed invoice, so the client will not in fact see this. That's because there is a dispensing fee that has been added to this particular item to yield a total extended price of $18.78. If it becomes necessary to dispense an amoxicillin capsule while the animal is still in the hospital, it is possible to type in the first few letters of the name of the item, in this case amoxicillin, select amoxicillin capsule, and in this case, if we say that we are indeed not dispensing it, but in fact administered it, notice DVMax now adjusts the price. This is due to the fact that there is an administration fee which is identified on the bill item screen, which was something we will cover later during the inventory management section. We took the administration fee and added that to the unit price of the drug, thus yielding $5.27. Had we dispensed it, the fee would have been greater because the dispensing fee in this case is greater than the administration fee. This is very useful for those facilities that are administering medications while the animal is within the facility. When the client is prepared to pay the bill, we can see that the prices are adding up at the bottom right-hand side of the screen. There's a subtotal. If indeed there had been a discount of any sort, which is something we will cover later, if indeed there had been any taxes, those will add up and yield a total amount due. In this case, there was no previous balance, meaning the client did not have a balance from a pre-existing invoice that was left unpaid. Otherwise, that would have been added in as well. So the balance that is currently due from this client is $119.60. In the payment method box, we can either type in the payment method or we can select it from the list as you can see. The methods are dependent on what types of payments your facility will accept. If you don't accept American Express, that will not be listed. In this case, let's select check. If we select check, notice DVMax will assume that the amount being paid is the exact amount that is due, $119.60. If we tab through that field, notice that we're taken to a section where we can enter in the check number. If we type in a check number and then tab to the next field, we can see that the item has now been paid. There is no balance remaining because the client has paid the total amount due. If we are finished providing services for this particular patient and are about to print out this invoice to hand to the client and release the patient, we can mark that this invoice is indeed finished. If we also wish to print the invoice for the client, we can click Print. The next step is to OK all of the items above. If we click OK, the item will be finished, printed, and the services have been included with the year-to-date spent for this particular client. Because there was no balance remaining, the client shows that there is no balance still due on their account. More so, if we open up Lucky's record by double-clicking on Lucky's information, we can see that under the History screen, each of the items we just provided is now listed as part of this animal's history. We provided an examination, we provided the urinalysis, we dispensed amoxicillin capsules, and we administered an amoxicillin capsule.